Morning. My name is Carmen Bell Delgado, and I will be your worship associate today. On behalf of First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, Delaware, I welcome you to our online worship service. Today we are joined by our guest minister, Reverend Dr. Michelle Walsh. She is a Unitarian Universalist community minister who shares a private justice consulting and online spiritual coaching practice with her husband, Reverend Dr. Clyde Grubbs, known as Tuckerman Creative Ministries for Justice and Healing. She also has worked as a scholar activist for many years in urban contexts, teaches as a lecturer at Boston University, and is the author of Violent Trauma, Culture and Power, and Interdisciplinary Exploration in Lived Religion, as well as chapters in other volumes. And now let us prepare our hearts and minds for worship.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. We are going. Heaven knows where we are going, but we know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Oh yeah, yeah. 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 Oh yeah, yeah.
Please join me in lighting our chalice. If you have a chalice at home, I invite you to join me in lighting it. Our chalice is a symbol of Unitarian Universalism, a way to remind us to stay together and fight for justice, for those who cannot fight for themselves, to keep the flame light in our hearts and lives.
Good morning. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be with you this morning. In our Unitarian Universalist faith tradition, we believe in the priesthood and the prophethood of all believers. Thus, everyone is a minister in our tradition, and some of us are called also to be clergy and to be ordained. As ministers, we call each other to worship, and we also grant each other mutual benedictions upon ending worship. And thus this morning, we will read together our mutual call to worship. It's by Marge Piercy, and you can find it in your gray hymnal, number 568, Connections Are Made Slowly. And you also can read along with the words on your screen. So let's read together now. Connections are made slowly. Sometimes they grow underground. You cannot tell always by looking what is happening. More than half the tree is spread out in the soil under your feet. Penetrate quietly as the earthworm that blows no trumpet. Fight persistently as the creeper that brings down the tree. Spread like the squash plant that overruns the garden. Gnaw in the dark and use the sun to make sugar. Weave real connections, create real nodes, build real houses. Live a life you can endure. Make love that is loving. Keep tangling and interweaving and taking more in, a thicket and bramble wilderness to the outside, but to us, interconnected with rabbit runs and burrows and lairs. Live as if you liked yourself, and it may happen. Reach out, keep reaching out, keep bringing in. This is how we are going to live for a long time. Not always, for every gardener knows that after the digging, after the planting, after the long season of tending and growth, the harvest comes. May it be so. Now let us join together in our opening hymn. It's number 210 in your gray hymnal, Wade in the Water. And let me give you a little bit of an introduction to this hymn. It's an African American folk hymn. Many of the African American spirituals sung today were what are called map songs, quote unquote map songs, that gave coded directions to verify safety zones or the Underground Railroad for runaway slaves. Many spirituals and folk songs created during slavery passed along messages of secret meetings, family ties, warning, and escape. And this particular one, Wade in the Water, is just like the other map songs. It employs spiritual biblical themes to disguise instructions for escape. It also was sung at baptisms, but Harriet Tubman also used it to warn escapees to wade in the water to throw off dogs and trackers. This is a lovely version of the hymn, and the words will also appear on your screen alongside the credits for who the singer was and the musician was. Blessed be. Let's join now in together in singing Wade in the Water.
Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. See that band all dressed in white. God's gonna trouble the water. The leader looks like an Israelite. God's gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water. See that band all dressed in red. God's gonna trouble the water. Oh, it looks like the band that Moses led. God's gonna trouble the water. Oh, wade, wade in the water. Wade in the water, children, wade, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water.
Please join me in affirming the mission of this church. First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, it's a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through love and action.
Our message for all ages this morning was written by a dear friend of mine at the First Unitarian Society in Newton. Her name was Noreen Kimball, and she was a wonderful lay minister during her time there. It's called The Healing Cup, the story of the flaming chalice. And if I was with you in person, I would ask you and the young people gathered, how many of you knew the story of the history of how our chalice came to be? Our chalice is this one of the very few practices that we have in common across the country for Unitarian Universalist congregations, as well as across the globe. And it's an important story for us to know. So if you're watching this as a family, just check in with each other. Do you already know some pieces of this story? But I suspect you may not know all of it. So let's begin. Many Unitarian Universalist churches and fellowships start their worship service on Sunday mornings by lighting a flame inside a chalice. This flaming chalice is a symbol for Unitarian Universalists, just as the cross and the Star of David are symbols for other religious groups. The story of how the flaming chalice became our symbol is an interesting one, and it begins during the Second World War. During that war, a lot of people living in Eastern Europe, Unitarians, Jews, and others, were in danger of being put in prison or killed by Nazi soldiers. A group of Unitarians came together in Boston, Massachusetts, to form the Unitarian Service Committee, and their plan was to help the people in danger from the Nazis. The director of the Service Committee was the Unitarian minister Charles Joy. Reverend Joy had an office in Portugal, so he would be near the people he wanted to help. He was in charge of a whole secret group of agents and messengers who worked hard trying to find safe routes for people to escape. Reverend Joy and his assistants often needed to ask governments and other organizations for their help to save people who were in danger. They would send messages to anyone in government who might give them money, transportation, or a safe route. Because they were a new organization, though, not very many people had heard of them. This made it much harder for Reverend Joy and the people in the Unitarian Service Committee to get the help they needed. In those days, during the war, when danger was everywhere, lots of people were running away from their own countries. Often, people who were escaping and people who wanted to help didn't speak the same language. Reverend Joy decided it would be much better if the service committee had an official symbol or picture to help identify its members. With a picture or symbol, it wouldn't matter if people couldn't read the language. It looked like Reverend Joy would need to find an artist. He went to a very talented man named Hans Deutsch for help. Deutsch had escaped from the Nazis in Paris, France, where he was in danger because he drew cartoons showing how evil the Nazis were. Reverend Joy asked Deutsch to create a symbol to print on service committee papers to make them look important. He wanted the symbol to impress governments and police who had the power to help move people to safety. For his drawing, Deutsch borrowed an old symbol of strength and freedom from Czechoslovakia, a chalice with a flame. Reverend Joy wrote to his friends in Boston that the new symbol seemed to show the real spirit of the Unitarian religion. It showed a chalice or cup that was used for giving a healing drink to others, and it showed a flame on top of the chalice because a flame was often used to represent a spirit of helpfulness and sacrifice. And so the flaming chalice became the official symbol of the Unitarian Service Committee. Many years later, the flaming chalice became the symbol of Unitarian Universalist groups all over the world. By the early 1970s, enough Unitarian Universalists had heard the story of the flaming chalice symbol that they began to light a flaming chalice as part of the worship service in their churches. Over the years, this practice has spread over most of the United States and Canada. What does it mean to have a symbol like this? Well, one thing it means is that wherever you see a flaming chalice, you know that there are Unitarians and Universalists nearby. Having a symbol also can remind you of what's important to you, and sometimes a reminder can make a very big difference. One very old woman told how the flaming chalice of her homeland, Czechoslovakia, helped her while she was in a prison Nazi camp. Printed under the picture of the Czech flaming chalice was the motto, Pravda vítězí, which means in English, truth overcomes, or truth prevails. Every single morning in that terrible camp, the old woman said, she traced a picture of a flaming chalice in the sand with her finger. Then she wrote the motto underneath it. It gave me the strength to live each day, she said. Whenever she drew the chalice in the dirt, she was reminded that someday the world would remember the important truth that every single person is important and should be free to think and believe as he or she or they chooses. When we see people light the chalice at the beginning of our service every Sunday, we can enjoy it because it is a lovely thing to do. But we can also remember the story of the flaming chalice and the strength it has given people for hundreds of years. We use it to let others know that Unitarian Universalists believe in helping others. And this story would not be complete if I also didn't share images from the work of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee today, who continue to help refugees everywhere, but also intersecting issues of Black Lives Matter, Indigenous rights, economic rights, and justice. Blessed be.
And now, our stewardship moment. Murray Grove Retreat and Renewal Center is the recipient of this morning's offerings. Murray Grove supports the birthplace of Universalism in America. Throughout 2020, UU congregations across the country will be celebrating the 250th anniversary of John Murray's meeting Thomas Potter on the sacred site that is now the Murray Grove Retreat and Renewal Center. Murray Grove, located in Anoka Harbor, New Jersey, is a retreat facility for spiritual guidance, congregational retreats, youth groups, families, school reunions, women and men's groups, conferences, personal and spiritual retreats. To give you a taste of Murray Grove, here is a video about one of Murray Grove's most popular programs, Camping in the Grove, which will resume in the summer of 2021.
It's just a magical place. They now have a wonderful campground that I can't wait to go camping in.
Oh, the Camping in the Grove program is just a program that shines. Children from 4th to 7th grade come, primarily Unitarian Universalists, but it is open to the public. We've been doing it for a number of years now.
This has been a really good year.
It's truly just been an amazing experience.
There's plenty of great crafts, a lot of interaction, a lot of discussion with the counselors.
The experiences that they have here, I feel like are just really unique. Even though it's only a week, the friendships that they make while they're here are incredibly special.
This was where I kind of started growing up, and then this is now where I work and where I spend still most of my summers helping other people get that experience.
So far, I think I've connected with a lot of the kids on a much deeper level.
I've been helping kids more, I've been leading better, I'm more comfortable in my own shoes.
I would credit this camp with building so much of my personality.
It taught me a lot about leadership.
It has changed who I am as a person.
You can take those qualities and skills that you demonstrated at Camping in the Grove, and you can use them to make the world a better place.
To me, Thomas Potter is one of my heroes because he had the resilience, the persistence to have an amazing dream, and in spite of all the odds, we're able to realize it. And in many ways, I think that's Murray Grove at this point. We have come a long way.
And the facilities are just wonderful.
And this place has flourished, I think, from the moment I've been here.
We've done a tremendous amount of maintenance and upgrades, but we still have very big dreams.
Yeah, I think any extra can help to keep this as a sustained property.
Our big dreams are just kind of a breath away. All it will take is more donations and more people donating.
A good percentage of the funds to sustain Murray Grove actually come from individual donors and from congregations.
Our board is very involved and dedicated to making Murray Grove a better place.
What strikes me the most about being a board member of Murray Grove is there is such an intelligence, commitment, dedication from members of the board and members of the staff here.
Our staff work very hard.
We're always here to upkeep and improve and make it better for the guests.
We have people here around the clock to make sure when people do come and visit, they are taken care of and really radically welcomed.
The best way to see how much this place will have an impact on you is to come down here, even if it's just you by yourself for a weekend getaway.
It's an atmosphere that you will never be able to find anywhere else.
Come here and realize really what a gem Murray Grove is.
You have to come here to experience how magical it is.
This place really does sparkle.
Murray Grove will definitely change your life for the better.
There's no stress, there's no worry, there's just Murray Grove.
Please give generously to support a sacred space in our UU history, a space that continues to make the world a better place. Your offerings would be greatly appreciated. Please take notice on the screen of the 3 ways you can give. You can give by check, mailing a check to our church. The address is on the screen. You can give by doing the online donations on our website, or you can use the Give Plus app. Please join me in dedicating our offerings to the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action. We dedicate our lives and these our offerings.
Draw the circle, draw the circle wide. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide.
No one stands alone, we'll stand side by side. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide, draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide, draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide.
Draw the circle, draw the circle wide. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide. No one stands alone, we'll stand side by side. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide, draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No one stands alone, standing side by side. Draw the circle, draw the circle wide. Draw the circle wide, draw it wider still. Let this be our song. No
Our reading this morning are the lyrics to the Bob Dylan song, "The Times They Are A-Changin'." Oftentimes when particular songs become near and dear to our heart and are associated with particular times in our life, we remember portions of the song, some of the words, some of the music. Rarely do we take the time to listen to the song in its entirety and understand it as a poem, as many songs are first written as poems before they are set to music. So these are the words of the Bob Dylan song, "The Times They Are A-Changin'," written as and read as a poem. Come, gather round, people, wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept it that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth savin', then you better start swimmin', or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changin'. Come, writers and critics who prophesize with your pen, and keep your eyes wide, the chance won't come again. And don't speak too soon, for the wheel's still in spin, and there's no tellin' who that it's namin', for the loser now will be later to win, for the times they are a-changin'. Come, senators, congressmen, please heed the call. Don't stand in the doorway, don't block up the hall, for he that gets hurt will be he who has stalled. There's a battle outside, and it's ragin'. It'll soon shake your windows and rattle your walls, for the times they are a-changin'. Come, mothers and fathers throughout the land, and don't criticize what you can't understand. Your sons and your daughters are beyond your command. Your old road is rapidly agin'. Please get out of the new one if you can't lend your hand, for the times they are a-changin'. The line it is drawn, the curse it is cast. The slow one now will later be fast, as the present now will later be past. The order is rapidly fadin', and the first one now will later be last, for the times they are a-changin'. Here ends our reading. Blessed be. I invite you now into a time of quiet meditation and prayer. I lead a Zen Buddhist style meditation first, where I'll invite you into a relaxed state with your body and then sitting quietly for a minute or so. And then I'll follow that with spontaneous prayer. Okay? So I just invite you to find a comfortable way to sit wherever you may be located right now. And just pay attention to what's happening in your body right now, the sensations in your body. If you feel comfortable, I invite you just to close your eyes or let your eyes drop down into a soft focus. And just take a breath. Notice your breath. So often we're rushing through our days and we forget to notice that we're breathing. The breath is something we can always come back to, for the breath is the breath of life. It is the root meaning of the word spirit. Just notice your breath. Notice where you may be sitting or lying down. And just experience being held in this moment. Notice where your body is meeting whatever might be holding you. And just experience a moment of gratitude for being held. Stay with your breath. Notice if there are any particular parts of your body that are feeling tense this morning. And just invite those parts to relax if they will. If they can't relax, that's okay. And just give them the invitation. Notice if your neck or shoulders are feeling tense or sore. That's a place where we hold a lot of tension. You may want to shrug your shoulders up and let them relax, or roll your head and your neck and just let them relax. Let the muscles of your face soften and relax. And if you can, just invite a half smile to come to your lips as I invite our bell to sound 3 times. And then we're going to sit quietly for a moment. God, Goddess of many names and many genders, and no name and no gender, and whom we know most closely and intimately in our Unitarian Universalist faith tradition as that precious and mysterious spirit of life and love that moves in us and among us and out into our larger world. This morning we are grateful for so much in our lives, for the opportunity to be together still on Sunday mornings, even in this new form. We are grateful to be together. We are grateful for all those who work so hard on these services in this time, all the volunteers and staff of the congregation, your minister, everyone who is working so hard to keep us connected and together during these challenging times. We are grateful for family and friends who love us and stay close. We are grateful for the beauty of the days, the summer that's coming still, the people who are working so hard, particularly first responders, essential workers in these times, striving to keep us safe. We pray for their safety and for wisdom among all politicians, that they may guide us in these times to a larger safety for everyone. We are grateful for the joy and possibilities and music that still exists, that always is available to us. We hold also the sorrows of the losses of these times, the concerns that we have brought forth today with each other. Amidst the joys and celebrations as well, we hold close in our hearts any sorrows or pains or concerns that have been brought forth among us today. In the same way, our hearts are so large that we can hold the sorrow of this world, the pain and the losses of these times, the challenges of these times, while again also holding the promise of these times in the liberating forces that are on our streets and changing so much for the better. We can hold all of these paradoxes because it is true that joy and beauty are available even amidst sorrow and loss. And it is an indication at times the depth of our loss, the depth of our sorrow is tied also to the love and the beauty and the joy that we have experienced in the promises of what is yet to be. May we continue to bring our hearts and our faith out into this world on behalf of a larger justice for everyone. Blessed be. Amen.
Find a stillness, hold a stillness, let the stillness carry me. Find the silence, hold the silence, let the silence carry me. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, I will find true harmony. Seek the essence, hold the essence, let the essence carry me. Let me flower, help me flower, watch me flower, carry me. In the Spirit, by the Spirit, with the Spirit giving power, I will find true harmony.
I was born in 1961. There, I've outed myself, and you can calculate my age from that point. My first adolescent political consciousness began with Watergate, followed by the resignation of President Nixon in 1974. I was just 12 and then 13 years old, and there already was a lot going on for me and my family during that time, including economic turbulence and substance abuse and an abrupt move from New Jersey, from Ohio to New Jersey, alongside the discovery that I soon would need spinal surgery for scoliosis. For me, the loss of trust and security and idealism amidst these changes on my microfamily system level were paralleled and crystallized together on the macro level of our national political system at that time. Now, a decade earlier, Bob Dylan had also written of his own sense of the impact of such changing times for the different generations, expressing both urgency and caution in what he prophesied and witnessed in what was to come. Now, if I was with you in person in Wilmington, I would ask you now to raise your hands as to how many of you were old enough in the 1960s to have had some type of political consciousness or awareness of what was happening. And if you're like most congregations that I preach in as a UU, a lot of hands would be going up at this moment. I would follow that up by asking you if it crept up on you suddenly, like with a little bit of shockingness, like you could see the seeds of gradual change happening, but then it was full blown before you even knew it. Suddenly, cries and actions for justice were pouring out on the country on so many different fronts, from African American civil rights to Vietnam War resistors to the American Indian movement, the women's movement, Stonewall and gay rights, among so many. Now, if you carried an identity from one of those groups, perhaps it was not so sudden. You might have already been part of the movement. But I do suspect that the fullness of all of these oppressed groups breaking into the public square at the same time might have been a bit surprising in its intensity for most people. Now, if you were an adult then, did you rise up and pitch in and take action? Or did you need to watch it by choice or ability from the distance and over the television, as my family needed to do during that time? And then today's public events, from first the Occupy movement to the Arab Spring to the People's Climate March in New York City to the explosion of the Black Lives Matter movement across the country to the Standing Rock water protectors to the New Sanctuary and Families Belong Together movements for undocumented immigrants to the Women's March and the ongoing national impact of the #MeToo movement, and then the March for Our Lives and Never Again student movement alongside the Poor People's Campaign, both of which were focused on voter registration and helped to turn the tide for the Democrats in the House, to the youth-led Sunrise Movement for the Green New Deal and the global youth climate strikes on Fridays, and now we have a global pandemic before us, fostering movements of mutual aid and solidarity in so many different forms. From the knitting of masks to iMovie renditions by musicians to the 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. hour of clapping for first responders, among just a handful. And the uprisings across the country on behalf of Black Lives Matter once again. All of this among so many other movements, again, that I haven't even named. Does this feel at all similar to the waves of movements that were happening in the 1960s? Or maybe even a little broader than that, as former President Obama has suggested. What should our stance as Unitarian Universalists be when the times they are a-changin'? How do we side with love and movement building during these times? Particularly when we, as my family was in the 1970s, already may be struggling simply to save ourselves, to move at all, let alone help save the planet, when we're already struggling with just so much for our own survival, particularly during these times of COVID? How do we lovingly care for ourselves, our family, and friends, as well as for the larger world during the storms that are currently raging, with even more powerful storms yet to come? And that used to be a metaphor, right? That used to be a metaphor. This question goes to the root of our call during these times as a people of faith. And the times they are changing, not only for our larger world, but also for you here in Wilmington during these challenging times. Now, back in 1966 at his UUA General Assembly Ware lecture, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke to us then with words that still ring prophetically true today. He warned, quote, "One of the great misfortunes of history is that all too many individuals and institutions find themselves in a great period of change and yet fail to achieve the new attitudes and outlooks that the new situation demands." He continued, "There is nothing more tragic than to sleep through a revolution, and there can be no gainsaying of the fact that a social revolution is taking place in our world today." End quote. Indeed, a social revolution, again, is taking place in our world today, with life and death at stake for so many. You too, here in Wilmington, have a role to play in these changing times, in forging a new shared vision for the ongoing work of your congregational life with and within our larger association of Unitarian Universalist congregations. Now, in the past 3 years, we have emerged from a conflicted and transformative period in our Unitarian Universalist Association structures. First, with a presidential and more resignations, and then an embrace of the Black Lives of Unitarian Universalists call for teach-ins on white supremacy, and then the election of our first female president. Now, a little over 2 years ago, our UUA Board of Trustees held their board meeting at the historic Highlander Center in Tennessee. Now, how many of you have heard of the Highlander Center? I would ask that in person if I was with you, and rarely have I seen a single hand go up. Occasionally, yes, but not many people have heard of the Highlander Center in Tennessee. And they recently were victimized by arson and are still in a recovery process from that. Well, the Highlander Center is a grassroots organization that has been engaged in collective movement building for over the past 85 years. And that's amazing, folks. It's really amazing and historic that our newly elected UUA Board of Trustees at that time held one of their first in-person board meetings at the Highlander Center during the first year of our newly elected UUA President's administration. And now, at this most recent General Assembly, the congregational delegates there gathered there and our UUA board endorsed the recently completed report by the Commission on Institutional Change, a far-reaching examination of our association's progress in our anti-racism, anti-oppression, and multicultural work, with some very specific recommendations made as well. Now, if you have not heard of that report, I encourage you to go to the UUA website and Google it. It's called Widening the Circle. Very important report for all of us to read and engage in this coming year. Our UUA leadership fully intends not to sleep through this particular revolution as they engage in their visioning processes for our larger association of congregations. The times they are a-changin'. How large and how rooted will your vision be here in Wilmington? How well prepared are you to rise up and share in the creation and implementation of that vision with your fellow congregants as well as with your fellow Unitarian Universalists in your region and across the country and our shared world, because we are an international movement indeed. One thing I do know from experience is that cultivating a vision and sustaining ourselves through the messy implementation of a vision is never easy. It's also never an individual project. It has to be a collective one, all rising up together, each to their own ability, and with the loving support and recognition of each other's personal story and abilities and limitations. A vision rooted in a sense of abundance of our collectively shared and engaged gifts, and with compassion and appreciation for the particular gifts and particular limitations of each person. Now, part of this learning happened for me first through unique historical and experiential factors, and it continues obviously through today. I have been involved with racial and economic justice education and action since my young adulthood, primarily in urban ministry and social work, including 18 years directing a weekend youth urban ministry program, previously with the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry in Boston. And currently, my community ministry for racial justice and economic justice is focused within higher education. Now, at the end of 2014, I taught a very challenging racial justice course at Boston University School of Social Work. 1/3 of my students were students of color, and 2/3 were white students. Then, as now, we were keenly aware of things happening beyond the classroom, particularly all the murders of young black men. Previously, Trayvon Martin in 2012, which was the formal beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, and you can Google that history. And now in 2014, the murders of Michael Brown, Eric Garner, and young 12-year-old Tamir Rice. As I speak of this moment in 2014, I'm also keenly aware of the series of very recent public events involving the murder of black people. Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, Nina Pop, Monica Diamond, and George Floyd, and the rise of a new movement with the demand, stop killing black folks. Then, as now, the streets were ringing with cries for justice, and the Black Lives Matter movement began to take to the larger public stage for the first time in 2014. And if any of those names that I just read are not familiar to you, I encourage you to go Google them again today and find out more about these people we have lost today. So back then in 2014, it's not atypical in any class for some to feel more comfortable speaking up and for some to just sit listening. Often it's my white students who prefer to just listen. And a tactic I learned at the time during the Occupy movement in Boston to disrupt these kinds of tendencies for students was to have them agree at the beginning to a practice of stepping up and stepping back. Though today I strive for alternative metaphors that can be less ableistic, such as rise up and move back, or hold forth, hold back, any of those. But at that time, the metaphors I was using was step up and step back. So in other words, the students who are more comfortable speaking out are asked to practice stepping back and listening to create space for others who need a little more time to practice stepping up to do so. Well, that didn't exactly work for this particular class. A young, highly engaged African-American man expressed his profound frustration, that it compounded his frustration to be asked to step back. "No," he said, slamming his hand on the desk. "No. Everyone needs to step up. The practice should be step up, not step back." Particularly for these young white students for whom it was easier and more comfortable to sit and listen than to do the hard and less familiar work of emotional risk and engagement. Now, with challenge and support and a lot of grace from this young man, gradually everyone began to risk entering brave space to communicate with each other at more vulnerable depths. The times they are a-changin'. What worked before may not work now. New paths and new practices are called for. Certainly on the macro level of our nation, for sure they are. But also here on the micro level of your own congregation and its work together. So how will you here in Wilmington rise up in this process? For the times are calling us to attend together to the most serious concerns of our shared lives. And it is our children, the next generation right here in our midst, who are facing the most deadly consequences of our failure to find strength in knowledge, analysis, commitment, and collective action. Those coming of age now know this reality well, and they're taking matters more and more into their own hands on the matters of mass shootings and gun violence, as well as the climate emergency. For it is no longer climate change. Climate changed. It is now an emergency and a crisis. These young people, they will not wait for senators and congresspeople who may block up the door. They believe the evidence of their own realities in schools, in neighborhoods, mass shootings, and what they are being taught about climate change and climate crisis, including that, according to the latest United Nations climate scientists, we have a mere 10 years left to prevent the most catastrophic level of planetary change. And this pandemic that we're experiencing is just one symptom of the changes yet to come. The times, they are a-changin'. This is the heavy new reality, and it cannot be faced as individuals because that's where we fall easily into depression or despair. And if I was with you in person, I would be looking around because I could tell that there will be people who will be feeling disempowered and depressed and in despair in this moment. But that actually is where white supremacy as a tool of settler colonialism has hurt all of us, including those of us racialized as white. It fosters this false narrative of perfectionism and individualism and heroics, a false narrative that's deeply embedded in our Unitarian Universalist, white, economically privileged cultural legacy. Now, this new reality, this new changing reality, must be faced with humility and as a collective. And in that, there is active hope and energy available. A hope and energy we witness in all of these public, collective national uprisings and movements, as well as international movements in these times. There is active hope to be found in the global youth-led climate strikes and actions happening on a weekly basis. There's active hope to be found in the global uprisings against memorials to racist historical figures and symbols of colonialism. We need to watch for and learn from these collective movements, how they were built, slowly with connections growing underground, and how they are sustaining themselves in the present. From this we learn, and we grow, and we find our sustenance. It's something for joy and hope rather than depression and despair. Now, with all the possibilities of a new vision come all the challenges of specific tasks to accomplish and new relationships and partnerships to forge. It's in the nitty-gritty of change that we often find and need to face our deepest fears and anxieties together. Again, it's one thing to have a vision and a dream. It's quite another thing to be able to implement that vision or dream for the long haul, through the thick and thin of whatever new or unanticipated problems you might face, while also caring for each other in the process. And we can only do this together. It is not and cannot be an individual project, or even a project of 2 or 3 together, like those social justice committees that we like to lift up and say, thank God they're doing it, and aren't we so proud of them and what they represent for the church. Nope, can't be that. It also can't be an act of salvation by a clergy person, your minister. Nope, this is going to take all of us, the full multitude of our congregations in partnerships with local, regional, and global communities. Now, the various movement leaders in the 1960s knew this, and many of them trained through the Highlander Center. The fruition that the world witnessed as the civil rights movement only came after many, many, many years of different groups working side by side together, carefully and strategically laying the groundwork. Groups that included the NAACP, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Congress on Racial Equality, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, among many others. Now, as just a couple of examples, the NAACP spent decades building case law to overturn portions of the Jim Crow laws of segregations. Now, if I was with you, I would ask you again, how many of you know the story of Rosa Parks? And everybody's hand will go up. And I'll ask, how many of you know that that is a stock story? It's not completely true. That Rosa Parks was just this older woman who suddenly got tired and resisted giving up her seat on a bus to a white man and thus got herself arrested. The concealed story is that Rosa Parks was a longtime fierce social justice activist who also was the branch secretary for the NAACP in Montgomery, Alabama, and that she had trained at the Highlander Center. Hers was a planned action as part of a collective movement, not just a solitary act of resistance. Now, some of you may know that, but rarely have I preached in a congregation where the story of Irene Morgan was known. Irene Morgan also refused to give up her seat on an interstate bus in 1944, long before Rosa Parks. The NAACP took her case all the way to the Supreme Court, which in 1946 used the Interstate Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution to strike down segregation laws on interstate buses. What you know now as the Freedom Riders of 1961, many black and white young adults, organized by the Congress on Racial Equality, with some trained by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, none of them would have ever been able to ride those Greyhound and Trailway buses together from the north through the south if it hadn't been for Irene Morgan's breakthrough case, sponsored by the NAACP back in the 1940s. There's a fabulous PBS special called The Freedom Riders, a more recent documentary within the last few years that details a lot of this. And there's so much more history to this and more names to recount here than I have been able to share this morning. Now the question is, if we didn't know these stories, why don't we know these stories? We all have so very much to learn and relearn. There are so many concealed stories in what is recorded as history. And no longer can it be only the hardcore trained activists who know these stories. We all must know them and learn them. Finding and retelling these stories of resistance and the lessons of collective movement building is where the active hope that sustains all of us will be found, as well as the learning of how to do this. And we don't have a lot of time left, folks. now is the time when we each need to rise up and do our share of learning this history and finding the lessons in it for us. It takes a lot to embrace the unknown with humility. It takes spiritual courage and what is often called a leap of faith. Though while we intellectually know our interdependence, we also need our knowing to be embodied and engaged by rising up and speaking our truth and building our individual courage, our brave space. Okay, that's another term you can Google. We build it in community and in ourselves. And we cultivate spiritual practices of resilience that lead to the actions of creating this brave space and connected relational space. This happens by getting to know each other in our depths and by taking risks in sharing our personal stories, including our personal gifts and personal limitations, and by building our relational capacity for shared vulnerability and intimacy. And then to not rest easy in the comfortableness of our personal congregational home, but also to share that abundance by reaching out to your fellow regional congregations and local community organizations across lines of difference, including religious difference. So I return now to where I started. What will be your vision here in Wilmington as you engage your work together in reimagining yourselves for these particular times? How large and how rooted in your relationships with each other will you be as you envision this next crucial decade of your shared ministry together? How will you, as an individual, rise up in this community? And how will you rise up with each other, with your fullest hearts, your open hearts, your compassionate hearts, and your forgiving hearts, sometimes something that's hard for us, to shape and support the implementation of that vision as we face these national and global challenges together? The vision of our faith as Unitarian Universalists is shaped by an ancestral community that is very large, international in scope and history. And we are just one small, though important part of that long ancestral chain. Our ancestors are with us no matter where we go and in how we struggle at this particular moment in time. And one day we will be with them in the authenticity of the spiritual legacy that we leave by rising up together, locally and globally. The times they are a-changin', and we can change with them. Just don't stand in the doorway, don't block up the hall. Your old road is rapidly aging. Blessed be, and amen. And let's join together for our closing hymn. It's number 146 in your gray hymnal, and the words will appear on your screen as well. It's called Soon the Day Will Arrive. It's written in Hebrew originally, and it expresses a belief in a better tomorrow. So let's join together from your homes. Soon the day will arrive.
Together no longer believe.
Now, as I said in the beginning, in our Unitarian Universalist faith tradition, we believe in the priesthood and the prophethood of all believers. Thus, we call each other to worship, and we also end with a mutual benediction. So let us all say together from your homes, number 702 from your gray hymnal, attributed to St. Francis of Assisi. Let's join together in reading. Where hate rules, let us bring love. Where sorrow, joy. Let us strive more to comfort others than to be comforted, to understand others than to be understood, to love others more than to be loved. For it is in giving that we receive, and in pardoning that we are pardoned. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen.
Please join our chalice extinguishing response. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Come gather round, people, wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have groaned, and accepted that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, then you'd better start swimming, or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changin'. Writers and critics who prophesy with your pen, and keep your eyes wide, the chance won't come again. And don't speak too soon, for the wheel's still in spin. There's no telling who that it's naming, for the loser now will be later to win, for the times they are a-changin'. Now